Hi, good evening. I'm Dr. Philip McMillan. Thank you for joining me. And today we start off with probably one of the most serious issues geopolitically across the world because the United States is important to the rest of the world. And this failed attempt on Donald Trump's life, I think, has shocked us all. It's one thing to be fussing about the political viewpoints, and as an outsider looking in at the United States, oftentimes the views can become so polarized that I think they fail to understand just how many advantages they have and how important their role in geopolitics across the world is. So, this most recent situation with an assassination attempt around political differences is shocking to contemplate. The reason that I've mentioned the link with COVID is because one of the first things to come out are the conspiracy theories, the geopolitical implications of what could happen if he became the leader of the free world again. What would happen in relation to what's going on in the Ukraine, what's going on in Israel, what's happening in the Middle East generally, what's happening with China, what's happening with Russia. And what we have to recognize is that we must look at all potential possibilities and not exclude any because we assume people would not do it for malicious reasons. And I'm not talking about the just the person who attempted to shoot him. I think that COVID has, in a sense, wiped away some of my naivety and made me realize that there are pretty serious people out there who will do whatever it takes for what they want, whether it's power, whether it's financial control, whatever it is. And that's the association with COVID that I've got. And the lesson that I think I'm trying to highlight is that we need to go back to the basics of the questions that need to be answered. And I'll start off with the first of three short videos here, just to get you thinking and to demonstrate what it is that really I am focused on at this point. In the middle of 2020, just after the pandemic had spread across the world, a scientist who was trying to understand the virus and how easily it spread was looking carefully at the spike protein on the virus. There was an unusual pattern called a furin cleavage site that made the virus much more infective. This furin cleavage site was not part of any other human coronavirus and was certainly not a part of the original epidemic in 2003. In his search to understand exactly what it was and how it managed to be there, he stumbled on to the fact that the exact sequence of this furin cleavage site was also in a patent. Yes, the exact sequence had been patented a few years before. What would you do with that information? So that's the first point that I think people need to realize that that's not a conspiracy theory. That's just the scientific facts. And it hasn't really been answered. And a lot of people will look at that and think that this is a target towards China. Not at all. Because what is very clear from the research is that a lot of the funding came from the Western world. What was happening in that lab was a global international collaboration. Whichever way you take it, this virus has targeted people who are older, who have comorbidities. And in a sense, if you wanted to target that group, they have come up with a very effective strategy. This is the point that I'm making in terms of malicious intent. And It's because of that information, and I'll play it in the next short video. I've had the privilege of speaking to scientists who are right at the cutting edge of this. And it is because of what these scientists are finding. That's why I've been so focused on STORM, spike triggered autoimmune response mechanism. This is what I'll be presenting about quite shortly in another week. So if you are interested in the webinar, please click on the link in the description. And it's largely because I don't expect, based on the trajectory that has happened with the virus and the variants, I don't expect it to go away. And I do expect that we're going to see another kind of disease. The question is, what is it? How can we mitigate it? And what should we do about it? So I'm no longer looking at this in a naive way. And this is what I mean with regards to what has happened yesterday. I have that reminder that we are dealing with serious situations that have huge implications to health and life across the world. We need answers. And in the same way that they need to find the answers as to exactly who, what was involved in that assassination attempt, the COVID lesson is that we didn't push as hard as we could to get the answers that we should have. Here is another clip talking in a little bit more detail about that furin cleavage site and what that scientist found.
Is about 7 or 8 codons, so about 24, 26 letters. Is that present in the previous database of viruses developed in Wuhan? And it was not. But it was present in this 19 nucleotide stretch, was present in this patent in 2016.
No, hold on there a second. So when you saw that, what did you think?
Well, yeah, probably not rated G thoughts. So, when we saw that, first we wanted to confirm, is that real? And we did. And second, we wanted to learn more about what this patent was about. And it was a tumor biology patent. It's a tumor vaccine patent. Basically, it is a library of different sequences that were patented for proprietary tumor vaccines back in 2016. So, a very legitimate scientific purpose. When we first came across this, we were wondering what to do with this information. To be blunt, the summer of 2020 was a very challenging summer in so many respects, right? Nobody in our group wanted to publicize this, and we sat on it probably for 7 or 8 months.
Did you personally have any pushback on it?
So I also went to my boss, and he said, this looks legitimate, and you should pursue this. And so he was very supportive of moving forward with submitting this for publication. So my wife made sure that I had life insurance on me. There was a side to her. No untoward professional blowback as yet, and I'm thankful for the University of Oregon's support in that regard. I would like to say that the point of this paper was not to point a finger at any person or company. The point of this paper was to bring an important piece of evidence to light, that there's been this debate for more than 2 years now as to, is this a lab leak or is this natural outcome? And so this is a significant piece of evidence that weighs against natural evolution.
So, yes, that information, as I said, I've been privileged to be able to speak to these scientists. And so I have a good understanding as to what's going on in the background. And what seems to be clear is that this information was significantly suppressed. You have to understand that this only came about largely because of one person and a group, a team of people, diverse people across the world who kept on digging and wouldn't leave it alone. Else it would have been classed as misinformation and it would have disappeared. The significance of it, however, is that if you don't acknowledge the possibility of this being a lab made virus, it means that you are assuming that the virus is going to follow a normal trajectory and that it will cause normal standard disease. When you assume that it could be from a lab, you are not therefore following that paradigm. And this is the point I'm making. When I step outside of the paradigm, I expect this to happen. And this is the point I'm making. Without that understanding, you will continue to think that this is going to go away. And the lesson here is that the variants are continuing to ramp up. This is potentially intended to cause harm. We have to consider that. And this is why I said Trump's recent assassination reminded me that there are some serious people out there with significant malintent, not just for individuals, but for the world. We really have to come and reflect carefully on what that means and how do we try our best to interfere with what potentially could be happening. I'll play this final video here just to again hammer home this point that this question about a lab leak is not random. There is a lot of scientific evidence that was suppressed that should have caused us to do thorough investigations into that. Let's see what someone else had to say. Since you were looking at SARS, now this is a question. You can step around this question if you want, okay? But
I
I have
don't
to
step
ask
around
you.
any questions. That's not my nature. I
So
go head on.
So let's go head on. So when you first heard about the SARS-CoV-2 coming out in China, did you also think at the time, because I thought it, this is a lab-related virus? What were your thoughts at the time?
Yeah, so look, I put my foot in it early. So we do a lot of computer modeling of viruses. It's a sideline. I've done artificial intelligence now for 25 years, way before it became sexy. So we've modeled influenza viruses. The first thing we did when we got the genetic sequence of SARS-CoV-2, which was mid-January 2020, is I got my guys to simulate the virus, and we were trying to identify the human receptor, because at that point no one knew they didn't even know what the virus was, let alone what receptor it was binding to. So we created a in silico model of the spike protein to make a vaccine, so to understand the protein. And then I had this brilliant idea, well, why don't we get the different receptors that coronaviruses are known to bind to. Obviously ACE2 is the one of them, but also DP4, which MERS binds to. So we actually modeled all of those to see which one the spike from COVID-19 was binding to, and we found it bound to ACE2, about the same time the Chinese actually described ACE2 as the receptor. And so having built this model that seemed to be working and predicted the receptor, I had this great idea. Well, everyone is postulating an animal where it's come from. Why don't we go and get the genomic sequence of all the ACE2s from all the different species, and model the structure of those ACE2s. And so it's a lot of work, this, but in silico, and now dock the spike protein. And if we find one that's a particularly good fit, a particular species of ACE2, well, that's the animal it's probably come from. And so we ran all these simulations, and lo and behold, when we analysed the data, the best receptor was the human receptor, which said the virus had come from humans. And that didn't make a lot of sense, except if you think it came from human cells being cultured in a laboratory with the virus. And so we actually went live with that story in about April, May 2020, right into a minefield, because we weren't saying it was a lab virus. We were just saying, look, this is really interesting, unusual data that might suggest this isn't necessarily a natural virus, or there's a lot of explaining to do. And we were attacked by the virology associations, you name it. We were public enemy number one for just raising what we thought was an innocent scientific question. And it took us a year to get that paper published. The journals just would not touch the paper, even though we weren't saying this proved it was a lab-derived virus.
So these were two scientists, different parts of the world. One was in the USA, the other one was in Australia. They were doing independent research, and this is what they came up with. Now, you would think that we would want to find the answers to that, but no. The political decisions were that it wasn't important, and anyone who spoke about it was sharing misinformation. As I mentioned to you, it's one thing about politics, and people could be trying to cover their backside, so to speak. But from a scientific and clinical perspective, if it was lab derived, it's unlikely to have the same characteristics of other animal viruses that transitioned. And this is why I think there is so much concern when people speak of the bird flu pandemic. Because if we haven't answered what happened with COVID-19, if we acknowledge the fact that we recognize that it could have been lab made, we grasp that people could have malicious intent, yet we don't try and deal with it, what are the chances that this could happen again? So when you think about what happened with Trump, it would be the equivalent of him saying that was a one-off attempt. I'm not worried about it. I will continue with my standard practice. I'll not increase my Secret Service quotas. I'll not add any extra layers of security because that is not going to happen again. I think that would be foolish. And if we did the same thing with COVID-19, I think also that would be foolish. It would therefore strengthen the hand if there was malicious intent for it to be done again. That's the lesson that I think that we have to take from this. This is not a time for us to just casually overlook things. We need the answers. And frankly, anyone who attempts to block answers, who attempts to obfuscate this process, should be considered as part of the problem. These are serious times, and we need to find answers. So, as I said, all of this has strengthened my concern about this storm because more and more variants are coming. This is not behaving like a typical virus, and it's certainly not getting endemic. What kind of disease will occur in the next few months or few years, and how many people could be seriously harmed or die because we have overlooked what should have been a very basic and simple question. Where, who, why? Who benefited? What are the costs? So, I hope you find this valuable, and please, let's all remember the USA, remember Trump, and hope that they find whoever is behind this, whether or not it's a lone wolf or it involves others. Because if they don't do that, the implications are serious. Let us not make the same mistakes with COVID-19. Thank you.